In less than 3 weeks, on October 1st, the U.S. government will shut down if Congress does not pass a new spending package. Government shutdowns have only been happening in the U.S. for the last 50 years. There have been 21 of them starting in 1976. The longest shutdown was in the previous administration. It lasted 34 days. Most of them have lasted less than a week, and some have lasted only a handful of hours. Linda Bilmes joins me now. She is a professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. So, Professor, government shutdowns have not always existed in this nation. Tell us about the law and that changed that in 1974 and how things have evolved to our current state.
Yes, well, the Constitution very clearly gives the power of the purse, as it's called, to Congress. But in the 1921, there was a law passed that shifted a lot of budgetary power to the president. And this endured until the Vietnam War, when Congress was at odds with President Nixon over funding for Vietnam. Congress actually tried to withhold funds for the fighting in Vietnam to bring the war to an end. And President Nixon spent them anyway, leading to Congress passing in 1974 the Congressional Impoundment Act, as it was called, which reasserted congressional control over the budget process and also added a lot of reforms, some of which have worked better than others.
So this thing that we think of as being a kind of modern nightmare is really founded in the clash between, two branches of government. That's a part of the American system. So if we leave aside the current shutdown, keep us in this sort of 30,000-foot approach and thinking about it in the abstract. Is it always a bad thing to have these fights, or is this the byproduct of earnest disagreement?
Well, I think shutdowns typically happen when one or both parties are very angry. And so they typically don't achieve much, and they don't achieve it well. There have been a couple of instances where the shutdown, I would say, did not destroy things in the end, although we could have compromised without one. And there were two long shutdowns during the Clinton administration, where I served, where Speaker Gingrich at the time had a strong majority in Congress. These were over disputes around budgetary spending and the allocation of resources in society. But both Speaker Gingrich and President Clinton wanted to get to a balanced budget, and they did manage to achieve that and balance the budget for 4 years. An example of a shutdown that really did not achieve anything was the shutdown during the Trump administration, which lasted for a month, over funding for the border wall. And that resolved without any disposition of the border wall, without funding for the border wall. And 9 months later, there were various negotiations which gave some more funding for border security, but he didn't get what he wanted to. And there was a huge amount of disruption in a 1 month long shutdown.
What you mentioned, the disruptions, what is the cost, if not in dollar terms, of these repeated kind of brinksmanship moments? Because I throw in the debt ceiling brinksmanship as well. Perhaps I shouldn't. But what's your sense of the cost just overall of this way of doing business?
I think there's a really profound cost, which is that the public is fed up. The public just wants Congress to pass a budget and to get things done and to spend resources effectively and to allocate resources fairly. They don't want to see all this. And the cost of disruption is not just in dollars, but it's also the cost to all the people who work in the government in good faith. It's a cost to my students and other young people studying government who are looking at this thinking, do we really want to work in government that functions or dysfunctions like this? So there are a lot of costs beyond just the dollars and pennies spent in turning on and turning off the lights.
And briefly, Professor, there are a considerable number of fiscal tough choices that need to be made in the future by these same lawmakers. What does the current situation in terms of shutdowns tell you about the capacity for Congress to work through these tough issues, which, as you say, are all about allocating scarce resources?
I think that one of the real failings of the 1974 Budget Reform Act is that although it created budget committees to try and look across government at all different kinds of spending, it didn't really give them enough teeth to do the job. So we really have no good mechanism in government right now for really looking at mandatory spending, which are things that sort of go automatically by formula, and discretionary spending, which are the annual spending bills, which government shuts down over during disagreements. And losing this this good ability to decide and make trade-offs has led to, as everyone is familiar, spending more and more through debt, running up the national debt, and a lot of frustration with the public and to poor fiscal outcomes over a long period of time.
Linda Bilmes, professor at Harvard Kennedy School, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.